weeks in and 67 movies deep, my brain has begun to show signs of decay. Welcome to the Octemberfest podcast. I continue to be Jeff, your chaperone through the creeps, and this is the recap of week 3 of 2025's Fest. It's been a week, boys and girls. A week of changed plans, surprise victories, frustrating formatting, and educational binging. I'd originally intended to dig into the Final Destination franchise this week as the focus of my annual binge within a binge tradition, but the scheduling just didn't line up. While thinking about those films, however, and how their inevitable, inescapable, impending doom feels a little too on the nose at the moment, I also got to thinking about what I've decided to call tragic horror. Now, pretty much all horror is tragic in some way or another. It's implied by the genre. But when I refer to tragic horror, I'm talking about films where no one survives. The heroes don't escape, the tale has no happy ending, the cycle of evil will continue. I've watched a lot of these films this season, though I'm still debating with myself if I'll label them as such in any of these recaps. If I did, it would certainly spoil some of the suspense. I've been thinking about why there are so many recent examples of tragic horror, and I believe part of the blame lies with the Blair Witch Project, and found footage in general. In a normal story, someone needs to survive to spread the tale, or it simply remains a mystery. But with found footage, only the cameras need to escape. The recent glut of influencer-centric stuff is an evolution of this idea. With the terror unfolding live on the internet, no one needs to escape. The events to become legend, the scares have already spread already. I don't know if it's a recent thing to axe the whole cast rather than let weary survivors or the final girl end the villain, but I will definitely have it in the back of my mind in future screenings. That said, I kicked off this week with a tragic horror I don't mind spoiling, as it's more than 40 years old. After a long day of writing and recording the last recap, I settled in for what I called just fucking watch something night, and queued up the perfect movie for a single item evening, John Carpenter's The Thing, the 1982 classic, not to be confused with the CGI shitfest reboot that I will not subject myself to again. I'm certain I talked about this some last year. I watched The Thing every October. But the story of Kurt Russell and Keith David facing off against extra-worldly terror in the bleak, cold vastness at the bottom of the world never gets old. And that was it, the entirety of the night. I only managed to watch 20 titles this week. Some nights just seem to vanish. For the next theme, I went to a cliche. Afflicted Abodes, starting with a movie new this year, 825 Forest Road. I popped this one on because of the plot summary. A family moves to a new town and encounters secrets buried in its past. But as a bonus, I found out it was written and directed by the man behind one of my favorite recent spooky house movies, Stephen Cognetti. I've not seen much of his work outside the sequels to the one that I watch most years, and I was excited to see what else he had to offer. Getting excited in October is usually a mistake. This is a weird film. Not so much in the subject matter, but in the presentation. Cognetti opts for a half-assed version of Rashomon, telling the story following each of the dwellers in the house as its own chapter, which gives you bits and pieces to the larger story as it fills in. This doesn't serve the plot particularly well. You're not getting unreliable narration from the POV changes and solving a greater truth. Just non-linear timing that would be hard to follow if everything wasn't extremely trodden material. He uses many of the same scare tactics I've seen in his other work, which isn't a bad thing. He's able to set up a scare and time the reveal, which is not always the case. But the weird structure and some of the acting of the supporting cast really let this one down. Not his best work. As I had opened the Cognetti can of worms, I decided to fire up my favorite of his works, Hell House LLC from 2015. I watched the director's cut of this movie as it replaces the really bad narration at the opening with a slightly less bad version that sounds like text-to-speech. I definitely covered this last year's recaps. It's become a staple of the season. Creepy tone, decent framing for a found footage story, mostly solid acting. But I did come away with a gripe from this screening. A commonality popped up in this and in Numbers Street. Cognetti likes to write in little hints to bigger happenings that never really pay off. There are scenes where people are arguing about a topic that is never revealed. There's a strange bit where one of the characters seems possessed but doesn't really play out. Just threads that are half woven and dropped. Maybe he picks those up in the 4 sequels to Hell House, but come on, man. You're not making the MCU here. Don't give us Chekhov's blue balls. I decided to finish off Spooky Residence Night with maybe the finest movie in the subgenre. Another one from '82, a very good year. Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. Why do I point out Tobe Hooper here? Because I think most people first associate this movie with Steven Spielberg, who wrote and produced it. But Hooper's the horror director here. This movie's full of great little character details that make Spielberg movies so easy to connect with, but is also able to shift the tone in an instant from safe to scary. So good. Unsure what I wanted to venture into for the next night, I grabbed a title I'd been wanting to check out and figured something would come to me. Yellow Brick Road, a 2010 low-budget oddity, set the theme. Ill-fated expeditions. YBR is the story of a group pulled together by a couple of writers who set off to follow the trail that mysteriously claimed the entire population of a town in the 40s. One day, the whole town just up and walked into the woods. Only one survivor returned and was entirely mad. The town is repopulated, the folks don't want to talk about it, the trail itself is a myth. But our protagonist has been searching for years, finally has a clue to the starting point. What follows is madness. The movie is slow for the first act, but escalates very quickly when a couple of the party members get into an argument that ends with a man ripping a woman's leg off at the hip with his bare hands. Things have gone wrong in the woods. I can't wholly explain the rest of this one. It's real weird and gets kind of lost up its own ass, but I was intrigued enough to watch into the credits, where I made the big discovery of the night. You may remember Robert Eggers as the director of Nosferatu from last week. Well, before he got his big directorial break, he designed the costumes for Yellow Brick Road. So now I have a theme. Trips that go poorly. I stumbled past a movie I'd not heard of that looked like it would fit the bill, but I didn't expect much going in. I figured 2024's Deer Camp 86 would be a handy cam shot mess of morons running around in the woods. I was so happy to be wrong. A group of pals go into the Michigan woods to hunt some deer and drink lots of beers. Something stalks these woods. During the opening sequence, we're shown news clippings of native girls disappearing and hunters being found mutilated by bears. Bad things happen at a bar. The boys in the woods find themselves hunted by something that is definitely not a bear, and some decently put together kills happen. The movie's shot well, the sound is good, the plot is solid, if not wholly original, and most shockingly, I like the actors. I'd not heard of any of the people involved in this one, but when they meant to be funny, I laughed. So unusual. I'll be looking for more from these folks. Last one of the night, another repeat. Devil's Pass 2013. I covered this last year as well, so I'll keep it quick here. But this one's a solid found footage feature following 5 folks up frozen fucking mountains. Sorry, ran out of F's. Some fun twists here, a little drinking game I like to play, listen for the lead actress's accent to break through. My plan for the next evening was Feline Fiasco, movies featuring cats. But it was also the beginning of a multi-day thread I'd been planning to close out the week with, Italian directors. I opened with Uninvited, 1987, a movie I've definitely watched before, but don't have logged in any of my Octemberfest records. This one has made the rounds as a weird, bad, fun, low-budget mess. The plot is bonkers. A cat used in medical experiments escapes the lab because somehow the experiments being done on it were to induce the ability to vomit a much angrier cat when it's in danger. Also, it's spring break, so a couple of broke girls are wandering around looking for a place to stay when they encounter a shady rich guy who invites them to a party on his yacht, a party we don't see but is referenced a few times, where he apparently invites them on a multi-day trip to the Caymans. The girls don't see any red flags here and agree, but then meet a trio of bros who are also down for spring break and decide to invite them on this boat trip with a man they barely know themselves. On the way to the ship, they run into a stray cat, which one of the ladies instantly claims and decides to bring with them on the ship. The ship she doesn't have any authority over, but has now invited 3 humans and a feline onto. A very short argument later, the whole gang is a sea, with an angry, drunk George Kennedy, who may or may not have been written that way in the script, and a female captain who hates her boss and wants the boat for herself. As most cat owners would expect, having a feline on a boat doesn't go well. Extra bad when the cat vomits out an infectious mutant monster. The movie is dumb but fun. They have one cat meow sound effect and they play it constantly. There's a musical interlude that makes me want to jump off a boat and drown. All in all, a good time. Next on the list, The Black Cat. Now, some of you may wonder why I bother to add the year after the title when I talk about these movies. This is a key example of why. Wikipedia disambiguation lists 10 movies titled The Black Cat, ranging from the 30s to the present. I watched the 1981 film directed by Lucio Fulci. Fulci is famous for his giallo and horror films, which often featured gross, for the time, effects work, probably most notably Zombie 2, an unofficial sequel to Night of the Living Dead. I had some trouble with this movie, as the copy uploaded to Shudder is formatted in 4:3, like a square, like the old TVs, but was shot widescreen, meaning I had black bars across the top and bottom, and the whole thing was small on the screen. The movie itself is pretty odd. An angry psychic mentalist has been using a black cat to enact his vengeance on the people of a nearby town for reasons that are never quite made clear to me. I may have enjoyed this more if I could have actually seen it. Maybe I'll try again in the future. Closing out Cat's Night was another Fulci flick, A Cat in the Brain from 1990. Didn't actually feature a cat outside of the opening credits. Fulci actually stars in this one as himself, a director whose mind has been so corrupted by the horrors he films that he can no longer tell fiction from reality, hallucinating scenes from his latest picture as he tries to live his life. When people around him start dying, he's worried that he may have cracked and become a character from his own catalog. But his therapist is an evil hypnotist who is framing him for the murders. I'd avoid that spoiler, but A, none of you are going to dig up a mediocre 90s meta giallo movie, and B, they reveal this like 30 minutes into the film. While the self-referential elements were interesting, the movie is muddled and the plot is thin. If you already know Fulci's work, it's fun to look at the tail end of his career. But outside of that curiosity, it's not one to seek out. I intended to end with Cats there. But when I got started the following evening, I found the perfect segue film into my next featured director. In 1990, Dario Argento teamed up with George Romero, the father of the zombie film, to make Two Evil Eyes, a pair of short films based on Poe stories. Romero's piece was The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, a decent tale of a scheming trophy wife, played by Adrienne Barbeau, one of the protagonists of The Fog, and her side piece doctor who have hypnotized her dying husband to steal his estate before it goes to probate. Things go sideways when the old man dies, but doesn't quite die. The second half was the appeal here, though. Dario Argento's own The Black Cat. Harvey Keitel is a morbid crime scene photographer struggling to get a book deal for his work. His girlfriend brings home a black cat, which he instantly dislikes, and ends up taking pictures of himself strangling the poor creature to sell his book. The cat haunts him, driving him into further violence and madness. Argento filled this one with Poe references, from the opening crime scene involving a pendulum to Keitel's character being named Roderick Usher to someone being killed and sealed in a wall. All we're missing is a murderous gorilla and its raven friend. This was a decent duo and would make a fine watch for a stormy Octember night. I mentioned giallo a few times earlier, and I'm guessing some listeners are unfamiliar with the term, perhaps outside the literal definition of yellow. Thanks, Duolingo! Giallo is a style of Italian horror mystery film that was really popular in the 60s and 70s, and has been a big influence on slasher movies ever since. Giallo films often feature splashes of color, really odd plot, and shots of gloved hands holding knives. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, my next Argento flick, is pure 1970s giallo. An American writer abroad in Italy witnesses an attempted murder, and somehow that makes him the lead detective in a series of killings. The movie runs a bit long, felt real slow for big sections, and is full of logical failures. But it's alright. They don't much bother explaining the motives behind the killings here. A quick, "the killer's insane" line at the end suffices. It's okay, but not the best I've seen. My final Argento was Phenomena, which I chose because it stars pre-Labyrinth Jennifer Connelly, and because the plot summary is absolutely batshit crazy. Jen is shipped off to a Swiss boarding school by her famous actor father for reasons unmentioned, where she sleepwalks, witnesses a murder, talks to and controls insects, meets an entomologist, played by Donald Pleasance, with a chimp friend, is accused of having split personalities and runs away. That's not the film summary, that's the setup. There are a series of murders that neither the school staff nor authorities seem to care much about, and Jen's father's lawyer, apparently her main contact to him, doesn't seem too interested in the fact that his charge was almost involuntarily committed to a Swiss psychiatric hospital. But the movie sort of meanders for the next hour. I was about to nod off when the absolutely insane ending blew my brains out. I've been back and forth with myself on how much to get into it, and I have decided that it needs to be seen to get the whole experience. I left this movie buzzed. So weird. Next up, for the director spotlight, one of the kings of genre. Mario Bava directed 40 movies, mostly in the 60s and 70s, and mostly in the horror and mystery genres. First up for me, Blood and Black Lace from 1963. Times have changed since the 60s, and things that would be shocking horror are a bit less impactful when we have depictions of human heads ripping themselves from their torsos, sprouting legs, and skittering away. Thanks, John Carpenter. So, the terror of Blood and Black Lace was somewhat lost on me. But it's a decent mystery thriller, and as I watched it, I recognized filmmaking techniques that are familiar in modern movies, likely developed here. A clue is found. The camera snaps between a host of guilty-looking characters. Which is the killer? Why are they all so worried? Dun dun dun. Blood and Black Lace was decent, but I'm not sure I'd go back to it. As I enjoy alliteration, I opted for a bevy of B movies by Bava. But next, Black Sunday from 1960. This one is more on theme for October. A tale of a vampire witch who is sealed by a mask filled with spikes, only to return and wreak her vengeance on the descendants of the man who condemned her 200 years later. Not sure this was a new story even 65 years ago, but it was fun enough. Closing out my voyage into Italian horror history, I watched Bava's 1973 take on the resurrected evil story, Baron Blood. An idiot from America travels to an ancestral home in Austria and decides to read a spell said to be able to resurrect his sadistic torturer forebear because reasons, I guess. This works. Randoms get killed. Mostly, I was bored. It ran about 30 minutes longer than it needed. The final theme of the week, Slasher Day. I started with something that had all the marks of the genre. Graduation Day was released in 1981 by Troma, who made dumb, gross movies exclusively, and featured Vanna White, supposedly. It was fucking awful. I was so annoyed by this that it derailed the follow-up films I had planned. A killer hunts members of a track team after one of their members dies of an embolism or something. The movie can't decide who the protagonist is, doesn't have enough plot, so it fills with bad attempts at satire, and thinks that football players are on the track team. Fuck off, movie. Your plot is thin, your kills are boring, and your acting is bad. Already in a bad mood, I fired up the third Sunday in October from 2022. This one's an homage to the campy late 70s, early 80s, Town That Dreaded Sundown, Halloween, Friday the 13th, proper slashers. They do a decent job of setting the period tone, and I think most of the weirdly long scenes and shitty acting were intentional, but you can pay your respects without leaning into the mistakes of the past. Mediocre, but I respect the effort. So I moved on from the 80s and things about the 80s and into something a bit more meta. Bloody Axe Wound from 2024 is a neo-slasher. It seems to take place in a reality that's at least semi-magical. Spree killings are recorded by unseen cameras and released on VHS within the world. Being a hit slasher earns you big bucks, and Roger Bladecut was one of the best. But now he's old, and despite coming back from the dead over and over again, his game is suffering. So his teenage daughter intends to pick up the axe. Playing on standard tropes of both horror and high school movies, this was a fun little romp that didn't go quite where I expected it to. I don't think it's quite on the same level as The Final Girls or You Might Be the Killer, but it's in the same family of movie worlds that are somewhat aware of being movies. Deadpool would approve. And the final slasher of the week will be revealed in a few weeks when I post our long-form episode on it. Here's a hint. It's another neo-slasher that gives us a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. So that's the week. Not as big a haul as the last couple, but we're still on track to hit the century mark. Wins of the week: Hell House LLC, Poltergeist, Deer Camp 86, Devil's Pass, Two Evil Eyes, Phenomena, Black Sunday, and Bloody Axewound. Honorable mention: Uninvited and Yellow Brick Road. Fun and interesting, respectively. 10 days left. Can that be right? Am I only 60% through? Damn it. Send us a message at octemberfestcast@gmail.com or head to octemberfest.substack.com to give me some encouragement or tell me to just quit already. And until next time, keep it spooky.